Will coaching less make you a better coach? I believe the answer to this question is yes, in general. And today I want to give you one specific reason as to why that is. And to do that, what I want to do is I want to show you a video that I found, came across my feed on Instagram. And I'm going to lay out this scenario and I'm going to let this play so you can start to see what is actually going on here. But basically a trainer is trying to teach their client how to hinge. This is something that many of us have likely encountered with clients, is like, oh my God, here it comes. I got to teach this person to hinge for the first time. God forbid this person just like has no idea how to do it, right? We've all probably been in that situation. And oftentimes this is the kind of strategy that trainers in general employ, which is basically that they try to get their clients to do these motions without any weight. So here's the trainer, by the way, absolutely nothing against the trainer here or any of these things. I think this trainer is probably very likely doing a great job based on how much attention she's paying to these details. That's just my assumption. So anyway, no personal hate. I'm just using this as a demonstration to show disagreement here. So anyway, this trainer herself obviously knows how to hinge, right? If you watch her actually go through this hinging motion, you can tell that like she's got this beautiful articulation of her hip joint. She's keeping her spine nice and steady. She's dropping her spine and she's keeping her knees relatively straight as she pushes her hips back. It's like textbook hinge, great glutes, hamstrings, adductor. Fantastic, right? But the problem arises here for the client, specifically because the client is not using weight. And so what am I talking about when I say coach less? Why will coaching less make you a better coach? Well, when you coach less, when you try to do less of this stuff, right? Less explaining, and here's a different part of the video basically, where she's trying to get her client to like push her hips back against the wall. This stuff can be helpful. Undoubtedly it can be helpful. But client learning occurs when trainers basically get their clients to use a challenging amount of loads so that their body has to organize around the load and then adapt to the load. So what does that mean? That means that doing things like this would not be my first bit of advice. And you notice how many things, I'm not playing the audio on this because I don't think it's super important, although you can read the text here. Doing this kind of thing is going to make your job a lot harder, right? Look at all this coaching that she has to do. She has to bring her up against the wall. She has to use a PVC pipe. She has to basically touch her hips, touch her back, drop this, drop that. This may be necessary at some points. I've certainly had clients who just like couldn't figure it out for the life of them. And so I basically had to sort of micromanage positions, go to things like isometrics to work them from the ground up. But in my personal experience, this is very rarely the case that someone actually will need to do this. What is much more likely is that you need to do this kind of thing, except put load in their hands, because force and the impact of force and the impact of how force essentially creates joint torques all around our body, right? Your body, your muscles, your client's body will respond to the forces of the exercise scenario. And so my sort of overall take on this is that the less that you can coach your clients, really the less that you need to coach your clients, the more likely it is that they are developing some degree of agency, they're developing some degree of comfort very quickly around the exercise, and they're starting to develop the actual skills that will allow them to self-adjust during those exercises moving forward. If you teach your clients to do these kinds of things in these kinds of very micromanagey sorts of ways, immediately what you will do is you'll create this sort of psychological block for them. I've seen this happen many times because I used to do it as a trainer, where I would tell the person, hey, this is the correct way to do it, this is the incorrect way to do it. And now I basically lean in the direction of like, hey, I'm gonna give you this load, I'm gonna demonstrate sort of what this exercise might look like for you. I'll do, in this case, I'll demonstrate a hinge, and then I'll give them the weight and I'll say, hey, just take your best shot at it, right? And I'll try my hardest not to create hard rules around what everything should look like, because a lot of times that just ends up creating more confusion, and you can see it demonstrated very, very clearly here, right? Because this woman, she's trying to execute this hinge, but then the trainer's like, oh, no, like you're bending your knees too much, you're doing this too much, right? When in reality, think about what would happen if you put a challenging load in this person's hand. What would happen? Well, what certainly wouldn't happen is this. Why? Well, because when there is not actual load in this person's hands, what do they have to do? Well, they have to stay over their midfoot. They have to balance over their midfoot. They have to not fall backward and they have to not fall forward. So if this individual is trying to push her hips back, which is to say she's trying to deviate her center of mass toward her heels, you need, in that instance, some kind of counterweight to be able to hold you in that position, right? You even see this in the trainer's technique with this PVC pipe, right? Who, by the way, again, obviously beautiful hinge, but look at this is kind of subtle, look at where sort of her upper body is distributed. You see how far in front of her feet it has to be? The reason her upper body is kind of tilted forward is because she doesn't have any kind of substantial load in her hands to be able to shift all of her weight backward. When she does deadlift a good amount of weight, this bar likely falls directly downward through here. It definitely probably doesn't fall behind that point, right? So basically, the short of this is that your clients will self-organize around the forces that you give them, and if you set up the forces correctly, the amount of work, the amount of coaching, the amount of cueing, the amount of talking you need to do will diminish and diminish and diminish. And I think that this is probably one of the biggest mistakes that people will make, maybe even through their entire career as trainers, is they will just get stuck on trying to get their client to do motions without any substantial forces at play. And so my perspective on this is basically that if you set up the forces in the right way, the client's body will respond. Now, it might not respond exactly how you want it to, but at minimum, at least they are off and running with some amount of load, with some amount of challenge, and with some amount of like, hey, I gotta figure this the fuck out, right? You see all this stuff happening. You see this knee bending forward. You see her basically holding her hands out in front of her because she has no load here. And because she has no load here, she can't shift her hips back. And so what this trainer is forced to do is she's forced to go over to a wall, again with no load, to try to get her to be able to shove her butt back. And so my thing with all this stuff is put the load in her hands, see how she responds, then coach from there, right? Coaching less will allow your client to do more things on their own and figure out like, hey, this is actually what load feels like. This is what challenge feels like. This is what an actual hinge feels like. And many trainers, I think, they do this in good faith, but much to the detriment of their client's learning ability and ultimately that client's medium to long-term progress. So this is just one example of maybe the way in which I would actually set up a hinge for a client. Ideally, you set it up in a way where, okay, there are so many restraints and constraints on their motion. In this particular case, right, I'm just demonstrating the exercise here, which is basically a Smith machine RDL, where that Smith machine, if we look at this from the side, is literally guiding the hands down in a specific path. So I either can do a number of things, but what's more than likely is that my hips have to, by definition, go in this backward direction, because if they don't go in this backward direction, my knees will literally just run into the bar as it's lowering down. So automatically, I'm not only making this recommendation to use more load more quickly with your clients so that they can organize their bodies around the load in some specific way, but also that you create an increased amount of restraint and constraint, both of those words kind of just referring to the same thing, like restrict their movement options so that they're kind of forced to do the thing that you want them to do. And for whatever reason, there are trainers and coaches who kind of like to make it more complicated than it needs to be. Don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. You can just be super straightforward and say, hey, this is what I think might help you in this context. Let's see how it goes, and let's just see how your body organizes. And many of you might not have access to a Smith machine, but even something like a barbell, like a barbell creates a certain amount of restraint around your system, right? Because the barbell can't go backward through your knees and the barbell is in front of you. So by definition, you have to be able to shift your weight backward a little bit more. So overall, the takeaway from this video is, if you are able to find a way to coach less, what it means is that you have found a way to prioritize manipulating force. And force manipulation and manipulating where the load is, how much load you use, and how that client relates to the load, right? That is where all the money is, because ultimately human beings are just responding to force. That's how muscle works. If I do a curl, the reason my biceps contracts is because the load of, let's say, a dumbbell is trying to straighten my elbow. So if you're a coach and you're confused about coaching, the first place to look and to learn is the physics stuff. How does center of mass work? What even is center of mass? What is a force and what is a force direction, and how does it create a torque? What do those words even mean, and why does it matter, right? Being able to answer those questions makes the actual on the floor process so much infinitely easier. I'm speaking from personal experience, and I'm speaking from the experience of coaches and trainers I've worked with now for several years. So if you're interested in learning more about coaching, if you want to take the confusion out of of coaching, check the link in the description. I have a personal trainer course. It's basically a course on the biomechanics of coaching. This will be a course that will basically teach you from everything, every sort of physics-based aspect that I have access to and that I feel confident in teaching. Everything from torque and moment arms to basically how to properly anchor your clients, how to coach every kind of motion. There's everything in there that you need. And if you're a personal trainer or coach and you have a question about that, please drop a comment below. If you have any disagreements about this video, you want to make a different sort of point and have some sort of input, just remember I'm not suggesting that like these sort of low load strategies are not useful in any way. Of course they can be, but that overall this coaching less perspective is one that will help you, I believe, tremendously. And if you want to learn more about all this stuff, again, check the link in the description below.